Hello, everybody. I hope that you're all doing well this week, and I hope that you, as much as possible, have enjoyed reading Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan, or at least our excerpted version of it. With this particular text, there's going to be some challenges, and because of that, I'm going to try to clarify some of his arguments. We're going to keep this discussion fairly short, and I'm just going to focus on the areas in the text that I think are of particular importance. So, just to review some of the things that we discuss in the notes, we said that social contract theory is based on the premise that we are governed because we consent or because we agree to being governed. That's the basic premise of all social contract theory. And as I pointed out in our notes, we will be discussing two other social contract theorists who make the same argument that we are governed because we consent to being governed. But those other two theorists come to different conclusions about what type of government we actually consent to. So, based on this concept of social contract theory, our part of the contract, of the social contract, is that the people must give up some liberty. In exchange, the government must address our needs. And so I used this vague language, must address our needs, because depending on the type of government a social contract theorist is going to be advocating for, those needs that we ask of government will be different. So Hobbes's assumption of what government is supposed to do or how it must address our needs is different from how John Locke is going to argue how government must address our needs. So this is the exchange or the contract that is made between the people who form the government and the government itself. So the key is that if we consent to government, or if we agree to be governed, then that government must be legitimate. So these different theorists are going to be advocating for different types of government. So that means that each of the theorists, each of our social contract theorists, are going to be saying that this type of government is legitimate because it's the type of government that people consented to. And then there'll be another theorist who says, no, this is the type of government that's legitimate because this is the type of government that people consented to. So, as I mentioned, all of our social contract theorists discuss this concept that we call the state of nature. And I said in our notes that the state of nature is a few different things. So first, it's the articulation of a time before government or civil society existed. So that's one thing that the state of nature is. I mentioned also that it's a time when people lived according to God's law. So if there's no law created by a government, then the people are governed by God's law, or the law of nature. And I said, finally, that this concept of the state of nature is a rhetorical construct, meaning that it's language used to make an argument. In other words, the argument for a certain type of government. So, if I'm arguing for a strong government, like Thomas Hobbes is, my argument will be that the state of nature is horrible. It's severe. It's never-ending warfare. Therefore, we need a strong government to protect us from each other. If I'm going to be arguing, on the other hand, for limited government, or government not having absolute power, then my argument for the state of nature will be that it isn't perfect, because if it was perfect, we wouldn't form government. So there are problems to be addressed, but those problems aren't as bad as Thomas Hobbes argues they are, for example. So the text, the Leviathan. So I gave you some study questions. So the way we're going to be conducting our conversation is by basically answering those discussion questions. So what is the Leviathan? So the Leviathan is a metaphor for sovereign authority. It is created by the people, so the people get together to create this sovereign authority. Hobbes explains that its parts are manipulated by the people. So, importantly, the Leviathan is not imposed upon us. In other words, government is not imposed upon us, but we get together and we create government. And we create and consent to its authority. And again, this is what social contract theory is all about. So the second question that I've asked you all is, what does Hobbes mean by appetite and aversion? So this is important in getting what his tone is about. So his tone is kind of scientific, it's kind of dry, and so he's speaking in this very dry, scientific kind of way in order to explain what he sees as human nature. So he says that we're naturally drawn towards the things we want or the things we need. That is appetite. So appetite is our natural drive towards things like food and shelter and safety. So we're naturally drawn towards those things. And aversion is the fact that we are naturally driven away from the things that we fear. So we're driven towards things that we need, and we're driven away from things that we fear. So he's using this almost the way you would describe the way animals have certain type of instincts. So humans' instincts are that we're driven towards things we need and driven away from things that we are afraid of. So for Hobbes, our behavior in the state of nature is natural. There's no government to control the way we behave. So the only thing that we have is our natural responses to things. So naturally we need certain things, and naturally we're afraid of certain things. And this is how we behave when we don't have government, or this is how we behave during the state of nature. So I just want to clarify, because his state of nature is obviously very violent, but he's not blaming people for this. He's just saying that when we don't have government, this is the only way that we can protect ourselves, is to naturally try to get the things that we need and to be naturally driven away from the things that we fear. So, what is power? What is it good for? So, for Hobbes, power is the force that makes it possible for an individual or a group of people to make sure that they can get their necessities. And if we can convince other people to work with us, or if we can coerce other people to work with us, that magnifies our power. And this is really important, because we can't be sure that our necessities will be met. We have a natural desire for power. So, one of the things that I find interesting, and one of the things that I think reflects well on Hobbes's argument, is that during this time of uncertainty, there's been a rise in gun sales because people are afraid that we're not going to be able to meet our necessities, that we're not going to be able to secure food. There's going to be a lack of government in helping us. So we seek power when we feel a sense of insecurity when it comes for our natural resources being met. And when it comes to a couple of our really close relatives in the ape world, we see how conflict is created when there's a lack of access to resources. When there's plenty of resources, our ape relatives, the bonobos, because they live within a society in which there are a lot of resources, are very playful and pleasant with each other. Whereas chimps, on the other hand, chimpanzees, because they live within an area in which there aren't as many resources, chimpanzees are very territorial and very violent. So when I've taught Hobbes in the past, and the other times have been in a classroom setting, not online, but when I've taught Hobbes in the past, I've said to my students, imagine a situation in which we're all starving. None of us have eaten, say, for several days. And I have one sandwich, and I take that sandwich and I throw it into the back of the room. So how we would respond would be based on that lack of access that we have to necessities. Sadly, we would probably become violent in order to get a bite from that sandwich, because we would be faced with this tremendous competition and the desire to survive. And so this is the reality that Hobbes is talking about, that when there's no government to keep us in check, when we have no understanding or when we have a lack of belief that we'll be able to meet our needs, we'll turn to violence. And without a government to keep us in check, that will be the natural state of things. Chapter 13. All men are equal in what ways? Is Hobbes making an argument for some type of social equality? No, he is not. So he's saying that this is in the state of nature. All men are equal in our ability to kill each other. So he says, even if we are not equally strong, because obviously people come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and some people are stronger than other people. But he says, even if we're not strong enough to kill another person, we're smart enough to be able to figure out a way to kill another person. So because of our resourcefulness, even if we don't have bodily strength, he says, all men share this equal power to kill other people. And we are also equal in the belief that we are smarter than other people. In other words, he's saying all people believe that they're smart enough to outsmart other people. So we're equal in our ability to kill each other and equal in the belief that we're smarter than other people. So he says there are these three causes of quarrel. In other words, three reasons that people fight against other people, or three reasons that we are violent. First, he says, so this is in the state of nature. First, he says, competition is one of the reasons for violence, because competition leads us to invade for gain. In other words, we will try to take away what other people have in order to get it for ourselves. So competition, he says, makes us invade other people's area to try to take their resources. Diffidence, or fear, makes us try to kill other people or leads us to invade for safety. So this preemptive because we're afraid. If we see somebody, we'll naturally try to kill them because we need to be afraid that they're going to try to kill us first. Glory, he says, makes us invade for reputation. So if we can get a reputation, that means that we'll gain more power because more people will be willing to follow us. So there's this struggle for power again in order to secure resources. And he says, basically, without a common power to keep us in check, we are naturally driven towards perpetual war. And this leads to the most famous quote from this text, in which Hobbes describes life in the state of nature. He writes, "In such condition, there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain." So in other words, because we don't know that we'll be able to keep the things that we earn when we work, then nobody will work. So there's no industry because the fruits thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that might be imported by sea, no commodious building, like roads and bridges, so no infrastructure, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and, which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. And the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So he's saying that without civil society, without government, so within this state of nature, all of the things that in his time he can look around and see and say, this is a great, look at these amazing buildings that we've constructed. Look at this beautiful art that's being created. Look at this infrastructure. Look at these bridges. Look at these roads. All of these things, these advancements in technology and science, in the state of nature, none of those things are possible unless we create government and have stability. So if you remember in our discussion about Machiavelli, this is, I think, an extension of Machiavelli's argument that in order to have any type of advancement culturally, artistically, technologically, you need to have strong government to ensure security. And that's where we'll leave off on this video.